Recording going. So I will officially start the Scottish American History Forum. Wish everybody a warm welcome. I'm Connie Nestor, and I've chaired this forum for about 12 years now. And I think, as most of you know, the History Forum is part of the Arts and Cultural Division of Chicago Scots, formerly the Illinois St. Andrew Society, which founded, by the way, the oldest 501c3 charity in the state of Illinois. The men back in 1845 set up a Scottish old people's home. It's since then been named Caledonia Senior Living and Memory Care. It's a big campus with lots of senior services now, located in North Riverside, Illinois. And for those of you who don't know, Chicago Scots is dedicated to nurturing Scottish identity through service, fellowship, and celebration of Scottish culture, in addition to support of Caledonia Senior Living and Memory Care. And so for additional information, you can just check our website, which is at www.chicagoscots.org. And we urge you all to please give generously to our Caledonia Senior Care Charity. It's a one-of-a-kind mission that all Scots can be proud of. And so before we begin our presentation today with question and answer period afterwards, so please hang on for that, with our esteemed scholar, Dr. Fredrik Albritton Jonsson, we are delighted to have Gus Noble, President of Caledonia and Chicago Scots, with us today. And Gus has been chatting, but he's going to greet everybody formally on the video and catch us up on what's going on, Gus, here in Illinois.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you. And a belated happy Tartan Day, belated but nonetheless heartfelt happy Tartan Day wishes to you. I just returned last night from a couple of days in New York, where I was with the National Trust for Scotland. I'm proud to serve on the board of the Foundation USA, and we had our board meeting and annual gala. And it was a wonderful event. We honored Robert Carlyle, the actor. And as it just so happens, I went to one of my previous jobs here in Chicago. I was at the British Consulate, and my colleague went to drama school with Robert Carlyle. And Simon Green is his name. He played in the Dumb Waiter opposite Carlyle, like Arab Pinter's Dumb Waiter. And he said that Robert Carlyle played the psychopathic character in this play, and was so convincing that he terrified my friend. So Robert Carlyle famously has gone on to play Begbie in Trainspotting, another famous Scottish psychopath, and Hitler. So he has a penchant for these kind of extreme characters. And when he was introduced at this very grand club in New York, Jackie Bird, the Scottish newsreader, introduced him, and he said, well, he comes from Scotland, so he comes with some tariffs here. We've imported him from Scotland, but here I am introducing Scotland's most famous psychopath on Fifth Avenue in New York, under the shadow of the Plaza Hotel. It was a surreal and funny moment. But when I told him that I used to work with Simon, this beaming smile came across his face, and he was genuinely touched that Simon had talked about him, and that I remembered to come and speak to him. So he asked to be connected with Simon. It showed that he is truly a humble and talented individual and worthy of the award. But it was terrific to be in New York. We had some performers here in Chicago the previous weekend that celebrated on Tartan Day itself with us. And the two musicians were Craig Weir, who is one of Scotland's best bagpipers and singer-songwriters, and then the winner of Britain's Got Talent from a few years ago, an incredible singer called Jai McDowell, who, as it turns out, played with his father in his band in Ayrshire in Scotland. And my band was fortunate to play with them last Sunday. And the guy who also plays in my band is from Ayrshire. So we figured that two Scots in Chicago, the most logical thing we could do is form a honky-tonk band. So we have this kind of country band. John in my band used to play with Jai's father in bands in the 70s and 80s in Scotland. So this phrase in Scotland that we have that's designed to kind of keep people in their places, I kent your father, I knew your father. And it was wonderful to hear this phrase being used, not for kind of, look, I know who you are, I know your people, stay in your lane, but as a kind of affectionate way of greeting someone. And John kind of gave Jai a big hug and said, I kent your father, and really literally meant it. It was wonderful. Jai also came to perform for the residents at the Scottish Home, and here was this TV star singing to people living with dementia, to people who were going through, you know, some harder times, the distress that aging causes them. And I looked out, and the smiles on the residents' faces, they were holding hands together. Staff were moved to tears. You know, it was incredible. And that Jai would come and sing for them meant a lot. But these are the moments, Connie, as you say, we take care of seniors with a lot of love. And those are the moments that have happened for the last century and then some, where we take care of seniors. So for those who support us, I'm truly grateful on behalf of our seniors. And then as a word, as I promised before this fire truck comes past, on the Rory McEwen exhibition, we have an exhibition of art by the great Rory McEwen, who's from my hometown, from Duns, coming to Chicago to the Driehaus Museum. It's previously been in Boston, in South Carolina, and in Florida. It's truly a remarkable collection. It arrived at the Driehaus Museum a couple of weeks ago and is currently being unpacked and ready for exhibition next month, and it will run through August. It coincides with a couple of other events that we're hosting, one of which, of course, right in the middle of there is the Highland Games. And Sir John McEwen, who happened to be a friend of my father's, so close in fact that he wrote my father's obituary. And in the process, he said to me, Gus, you know, the McEwen clan have been without a chieftain for more than 500 years, and it looks like I'm going to be the new chieftain. At which point I said, well, Sir John, you're going to come to Chicago, you're going to be the honoured clan, and you'll invite McEwens from all over to come and join us as we celebrate and pay tribute to the McEwens. And I'm delighted that he said yes. I'm delighted, Maggie, that you've been working with us to make the AGM happen. Sir John has written a one-man play about the history of Scotland and Scottish identity, which he's agreed to perform at the Highland Games a couple of times. Look out for an announcement on the schedule about timing for that. And then finally, Rory McEwen was a man of parts. He was not just the 20th century's greatest botanical painter, but he was also an incredible folk musician, travelled across the States playing Scottish folk music, and was eventually recorded by Alan Lomax for Smithsonian Folkways, appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, went back to the UK and hosted the very successful Hullabaloo Show. So I said, this is a warning to all those who suggest something in committee. You end up doing it and being assigned it yourself. But I said, you know, if we're really telling the story of Rory's life, we need to tell the full story and have a concert that celebrates his musical identity. And let's get the Old Town School of Folk Music involved. And the upshot of it was they looked to me and said, okay, you curate it, Gus. So the bands that we're having come over for the Highland Games include Skerryvore from Scotland. They'll be fresh from performing their 20th anniversary show at Flora's Castle in Scotland, which Flora, Rory's daughter, and Sir John are going to attend. Iona Fife is going to perform as well. She's an incredible folk singer that's performed up in Canada a lot. Maggie, you'll probably have known her or know her. And she's also taught at the Old Town School of Folk Music previously. And then, of course, I've squeezed myself in there as well. And our band's going to play it to represent the American folk traditions that Rory and Alec loved so well. So we're going to host this concert. Flora and Christabel, Rory's daughters, are going to speak. And we've got Tony Jones from our board. He was previously the head of the School of the Art Institute, the School of Art in Glasgow, and the National Gallery in London. He will talk about Rory the man. And then there's a very well-known Chicago artist who painted the mural at the Old Town School of Folk Music called Tony Fitzpatrick, who really represents, having designed album covers for Steve Earle and many other great musicians. His art represents the point at which music and art and nature come together, which is really where Rory's special sauce was as well. So that's going to be immediately before the Highland Games on the 12th of June, Highland Games 13th and 14th, and we'll have a big party afterwards to celebrate. I've probably talked enough and you're sick of hearing not just my voice, but the traffic noise behind me. So I'll just say now that, Connie, I'm grateful to you for organising this. And Fredrik, I'm really looking forward to your remarks today.
Well, that's a wow, Gus. In reference to Scarivore, we're blown away by that report. I'm very impressed. So I hope everyone can attend all of these august events. This is very exciting. And thanks to the McEwens for being our honored clan this year. And it's going to be great fun. Those of you who are in other parts of the world, please come and join us. It's the 14th and 15th. Somebody remind me, I don't have a calendar.
13th and 14th.
13th and 14th of June. So 13th and 14th, please do come and visit the history tent. Well, Gus, thank you. Thank you for that wonderful update. And I just have one more reminder before we begin. I want to remind everybody that next month on May 10th, historian Donald C. MacLeod, FSA Scot FCCP, will be with us to discuss Odyssey of the Scots-Irish, the Ulster Scots, from the Scottish borders to Ulster and America. And Donald, by the way, is a faithful History Forum participant and is on the Zoom with us today. And Don, I just want to say thanks again and in advance for speaking next month. It's good to see you.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Don's spoken before at our forum, and he's very much in demand. So we're really excited about having you back, Don. Okay, well, I think it's time to move forward then with our presentation. What we're going to do is ask everybody to mute your microphones and dim your cameras, and I will be helping you with that, anyone who's having trouble. And at the conclusion of the presentation, we'll reactivate your cameras and turn your mics on, and we'll have some good discussion. But we are all so very pleased to have with us Dr. Fredrik Albritton Jonsson, Associate Professor of British History, Conceptual and Historical Studies of Science and the College at the University of Chicago. And of course, for those of you who reside in the Chicago area, the U of C, as I call it, is just south on Lake Michigan in Hyde Park. It's a globally prestigious academic institution that doesn't even have a sports team. It's strictly scholarship and research and Nobel Prize winners. But Dr. Jonsson, we're so pleased to have you with us today. Thank you for making the time. And I'd like to turn the presentation over to you now, please.
Oh, thanks so much, Connie. Thanks so much for that kind introduction. Would you mind making me co-host so I can share my slides? Let's see if it'll work here. Okay, great. Now, let's see. I hope everyone can see the slideshow. I'll expand it here. Does that look okay, everyone?
It's coming up real well. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. All right. Well, it's wonderful to join you all this morning. I'm grateful for your interest in the topic and for carrying on the Scottish cause in the United States. I am myself native Swedish, born in Stockholm, but I have a great fondness for all things Scottish. My first book and my dissertation was about the connection between the Scottish Enlightenment, people like David Hume and Adam Smith, and the Scottish Highlands. So I've for a long time now I've been thinking about the place of ideas and the environment in Scottish history, starting really in the 17th and 18th centuries and going all the way up to the present. Um, I have published a number of books on this. I thought I would put a few of them up here on the screen for you to see. So the first book that I mentioned is called Enlightenment's Frontier, and that's based on my dissertation, and it's really meant to explain the place of the Highlands and Highland society in the Scottish Enlightenment. After that, I've written about other events and processes in British history, including the life of John Ruskin. And this book is called Green Victorians, and it was actually co-authored with my wife, Vicky Albritton. John Ruskin, as you're probably all aware, was born to Scottish parents. So I've always counted him as an honorary Scot. And I'll actually say a few words about Ruskin in a moment. My most recent book, also co-authored with a good Swedish friend of mine, Carl Vennerlind, is called Scarcity. And that book basically tells the story of the idea of scarcity and its twin, abundance, over the last 500 years of European history. And Scotland figures in that book very prominently, especially with Adam Smith and David Hume, but also through other figures. So what I'll do today is give you a little bit of a survey of some of my arguments and ideas. And then afterwards, we can have a Q&A. I'll be happy to talk about things that I touched on as well as things that I left out. Okay? All right, so here goes. Let me just move my, there, that's better. The topic of this presentation is a simple question. What was the place of Scottish thinkers in the emergence of the idea of the environment? Why is it that Scottish intellectuals were so interested in questions of the environment? How do we explain that? I'll touch on a few figures, but I note that this is a very abbreviated list. I could spend all day talking about this theme in Scottish history. So this is a somewhat arbitrary selection. And I want to end with a pretty maybe not controversial, but certainly strong conclusion. And that is that I think the Scots were right all along to think about the environment. I believe very strongly that we, humans, need to rethink the place of our society in relation to the natural world and the Earth system. You'll see how that theme develops throughout the presentation. And by the way, each slide I've tried to add an interesting image drawn from Scottish or British history. In this case, you see a detail from Roy's famous military survey of Scotland right after the Jacobite Rising of 45. And this is, you can probably figure it out. It's Edinburgh here in red. Okay, we'll start with Adam Smith. Adam Smith, as you will know, is now considered really the foremost Scottish intellectual of the 18th century, alongside David Hume. In my research, I have tried to look at Smith's works from a new perspective. Instead of beginning with the invisible hand and political economy, as many other scholars have, I asked myself, how did Adam Smith think about the natural world? What was his view of the environment? And to begin to ask that question, I think we do well to look at contemporary art that Smith himself might have been familiar with. So here is, you may know this painting from visits to London. This is Gainsborough's wonderful painting, Mr. and Mrs. Andrews from 1750. And in 1750, Smith was still a young man, still at his studies. But I think this painting encapsulates the idea of nature at a very formative age for Smith. So what are we seeing? Well, we're seeing a gentleman and his wife posing in front of their estate. You can see the row of wheat on the right, which was likely sown with a drill plow, a new invention of the period. And you can see on the upper right, you can see sheep here in the enclosure. And beyond them, you can see the manor house of the Andrews family. And over here on the other side, you can glimpse cows. And of course, this wonderfully painted dog that accentuates the sporty character of Mr. Andrews, right? He's clearly he's painted in a somewhat nonchalant pose as a hunter, as a sportsman. His wife is much more rigid. She almost looks as if she has we actually think that the painter Gainsborough may have used a mannequin, and that is why the figure is so rigid. But her face is really lovely and lively, wouldn't you say? Now, right behind them, not to forget, a massive tree. The significance of old trees, especially oaks, at this time was very important, both in Scotland and England, as an emblem of the gentry, of the landowning class that were considered the rightful rulers of the country. So we'll move on now, but we'll come back to this painting in just a moment, and I'll reflect on some of the ways in which I think Smith's thought reflects can be seen to reflect themes in the painting, right? So Smith, I would argue, looked to nature as a teacher. He thought of the natural order as the foundation of society and the economy. And I'll give you three examples of this. The first one is what we Smith scholars call the town and country dynamic. And I'll start with a quote from Smith's Wealth of Nations. In agriculture, nature labors along with man, right? Here we see that for Smith, human labor is benefiting from a prior work done by nature. And about 100 years later, Charles Darwin would make the same point, that long before the plow touches the land, the earthworm and other denizens of the soil have already made the soil what it is, right? So we could think of nature here as a teacher, as a guide, as a wise model, right? So it's not, what I'm getting at here is that it's not simply a resource. It's not just something that we can bulldoze over or destroy. It's an active, vital force on the side of humans, and really the source of human wealth. And this gets me to, so in the town-country dynamic, Smith imagines how nature makes human wealth. And it's to put it very, very simply, imagine you have a small town surrounded by a countryside. The fertile soil will yield up a surplus on local farms, and farmers will take that surplus to the town and sell it there. And townsmen, as they develop their economy, will acquire a little bit of wealth and a little bit of spending power, And then they will look to the farmer to bring produce and new kinds of commodities to the town. So what we get is a feedback loop where the country, so to speak, brings fertility, and the townsmen and townswomen bring demand or desire. And this creates a virtuous circle where the town demand will improve the countryside, and the more improved the countryside is, the more the town will flourish. So that's the town-country dynamic. Now you might ask, so this is 18th century Britain. It was in many ways a much harsher world to live in. A world before vaccines, before modern healthcare, public health. What did Smith make of the destructive nature of the environment? Well, this brings me to my second topic here, scarcity and famine in Smith. And here we have a wonderful quote, again from the Wealth of Nations, in the section on the corn trade. Smith says, "Famine has never arisen from any other cause but the violence of government attempting to remedy the inconveniencies of a dearth." Okay, so what does he mean by that? Well, my interpretation is that Smith believed that scarcity in the form of dearth, so high prices for grain and other produce, was a regular cyclical event, inevitable and impossible to entirely do away with. But that kind of scarcity never led to human destruction, according to Smith. The poor had to tighten their belts and make do with less in the pantry, and maybe the rich as well had to moderate their appetites. But eventually, the cycle of nature, the cycle of harvests, would bring back abundance. So scarcity was to be expected, but not really a destructive event. The only thing that could turn scarcity into famine, with a high body count, with great mortality, would be if the government interfered with the economy, especially the grain trade and the growing of grain. So you see how in Smith's world, free trade works together with nature to provide abundance, right? And again, as we just saw in the first example, nature is really laboring along with man. So it's not simply free trade, it's a benign, harmonious nature that makes free trade possible. And that brings me to the third point about Smith, improvement through free markets. Here you see again how important the environment is. He says, again, in The Wealth of Nations, "The land constitutes by far the greatest, the most important, and the most durable part of the wealth of every extensive country." So what does that mean? It means that all investments for Smith, all human wealth, should be first of all prioritizing agriculture and the larger environment. That is, again, as you see here, the most durable part of the wealth of every country. So you see how Smith, even though he's famous for his argument about free trade and commerce, was an agrarian at heart, someone who thought about a landowning society as the foundation of human welfare. Okay, so now take a step back and think with me about why Smith believed all of these ideas were correct. What accounts for Smith's optimism? Why did he think there was a harmonious relation between trade and nature? Well, one simple cause, very, very clear here, is the Scottish agricultural revolution. In Smith's own lifetime, new methods of agricultural productivity were imported to Scotland from England, and the results were staggering. Productivity of farming increased by a factor of possibly as much as 3. And this is all in Smith's own lifetime. He would have seen this, he would have known about it, traveling through Scotland, talking to his friends, many of whom were landowners or scientists engaged in soil improvement. The second reason I think that Smith was optimistic was that he was very self-conscious about how Scotland was catching up to England. England had always been the big brother, the senior partner in all things. But now, thanks to agriculture and manufacturing and commerce, Scotland and Scottish intellectual circles were catching up. So when we think of the Enlightenment, we can think of it basically as a game of catching up with other more modern, more advanced economies. The third reason I think that Smith was optimistic has to do, and this is of course very fitting for this group, he looked to America. And of course he wrote The Wealth of Nations right as the War of Independence began. He said very cheekily in The Wealth of Nations that he expected American growth to overtake British growth. And that in maybe as little as a century, a little more than a century, the capital of the British Empire would move from England, from London, to the Americas. Of course, we all know what happened next. This was not to be, instead independence. But you see how the agricultural and economic growth potential of America impressed Smith and gave him reason to be optimistic, maybe more optimistic than he was about England. I always get one question here, which is, wasn't Smith aware of the Industrial Revolution, which was already underway with new kinds of mechanized spinning? James Watt, another famous Scot, was tinkering and improving the steam engine and turning it into a powerhouse for industrial spinning right around this time. Oddly, Smith wasn't very impressed with Watt and didn't really imagine a fully industrial economy. He has very little to say about coal or steam in The Wealth of Nations. When he speaks of steam engines, he calls them toys. So it seems Smith was very much, this reinforces what I just said about Smith's agrarianism. He's not really an industrial prophet. He's thinking about the productivity of nature in agriculture. Okay, so this is the baseline, and now we'll look at a few other thinkers who build on Smith's ideas or diverge from Smith in interesting ways. Before we look at the next figure in that sequence, I just want to come back to the painting to emphasize again how it reflects really wonderfully well Smith's ideas of nature as a teacher, stable, harmonious, but also improvable. I think very, very important to notice here is also what is missing, what Smith won't see or can't see. And that, of course, is all the problems we're all going to be familiar with in our own time. Environmental pollution, ecological degradation, anthropogenic climate change, geological changes, and the Earth system. Now, it wouldn't really be fair to blame Smith for missing this, right? He was living in a time when most of these things were still unknown, right? Where science had not yet developed a clear idea of the Earth as an integrated system. So you might say perhaps he would have been a little bit less optimistic if he had known about some of these scientific discoveries that were yet to come. All right, now we turn to our next figure, who was a near contemporary of Adam Smith, John Sinclair of Ulster. Sinclair is probably best known as the founder and president of the Board of Agriculture, founded in 1793, which was the first government organization to focus on agricultural improvement in British history. He also wrote, or rather edited, a wonderful window on Scottish society, both Lowland and Highland, published in the 1790s, called A Statistical Account of Scotland. and that's been available for free online for a long time now. It's a parish by parish account of the state of Scotland in the late 18th century, written mostly by clergymen. John Sinclair was the person who organized all of this, who conceived of it, and who brought it to completion. Those of you with Scottish ties, you can actually look up your clans and the parishes where they were based, and find a very vivid description of agriculture, of manufacturing, of towns and population and so forth in these accounts. Now, I bring Sinclair into the sequence because he represents a different idea of nature than Smith. He was living through a great crisis after the loss of the American colonies and at the start of the French Revolution and the beginnings of the long war with revolutionary and Napoleonic France between 1793 and 1815. So it's not very surprising that Sinclair's idea of nature differed significantly from Smith. Most importantly of all, as you see here on the slide, was the idea that nature was a storehouse that had to be carefully mapped by the government and by science in order to conserve resources and to plan for an orderly economy. And for Sinclair, as many other Scottish landlords and British politicians, self-sufficiency in food and industrial raw materials became a critical priority because of the war with France. There was a genuine worry that the British Empire was collapsing and that Britain would have to fall back on its own resources and fend for itself. And here, the Highlands and the Hebrides, for Sinclair and his allies, seemed to represent an internal frontier. And I use that term very deliberately. They had just lost America. Well, not Canada, not British North America, but the United States had gone their own way. So, and they were worried that supply lines and trade would be disrupted by the French. So where better to look for internal strength than the north of Scotland? So you see how the idea of looking within the country for internal frontiers seem very congenial at this moment. And it's not a surprise at all that John Sinclair came up with this view of the economy after traveling to Europe and connecting with Prussian intellectuals. He looked to Prussia, a planned economy, an absolutist state with a strong military. He looked at Prussia as a model for Britain to follow. So in other words, you could think of Smith's idea of nature as laissez-faire, associated with freedom, with classical liberalism, with a cosmopolitan outlook on the world. And Sinclair's notion of nature is that of really military emergency and the necessity of planning and authoritarian government. I won't go into all the details of this, but I'll just give you an example of how Sinclair's ideas had a great important impact on the British economy. In the same moment that he was operating and supporting agriculture, Britain became self-supplying in iron making. And that was partly a consequence of technological breakthroughs, but also very much an effect of state intervention and involvement and protectionism. So tariffs is on everybody's minds right now. Well, it was tariffs on Russian and Swedish competition that allowed the British coke-smelted iron industry to develop in the 1790s and in the first decade of the 19th century. And perhaps very symbolic here was the decision by the Navy Board and the Royal Navy to use only British iron from 1805, the year of Trafalgar. All right. Our next figure in this group is someone you probably never heard of before. And strictly speaking, John Williams was not Scottish. He was born in Wales. He was a natural historian and mineral surveyor, but he spent most of his life in Scotland. And perhaps most importantly, he spent it surveying the mineral resources of the Highlands. And after more than 10 years of surveys, Williams came to a deeply disappointing conclusion. He had been paid by the government to prospect for coal and iron and other resources. But even though he went practically everywhere, he was unable to find good coal anywhere in the north, except the far north, and that turned out to be in Brora. That coal turned out to be self-combusting when it was brought to the surface, so not terribly useful. So John Williams, in our story, stands for two very closely related ideas, but also in some ways diametrically opposite ideas. He is, on the one hand, one of the earliest people in Britain to see the importance of coal for the industrial economy. So unlike Smith. But he also is one of the first thinkers to voice an anxiety about the lack of coal. What happens to society if we don't have coal? So you see how this connects with his Highland surveys. The Highlands showed him a place that seemed subject to natural limits, where the path taken in the lowlands and taken in England could not be followed for lack of strategic resources. So the Highlands for Williams becomes not an internal frontier filled with possibilities, but rather a zone, a backward place where strict natural limits, bad soil, a harsh climate, a lack of coal makes it impossible to modernize the economy. Now, I have just a very interesting quote from John Williams' book, The Natural History of the Mineral Kingdom, where he's talking about, on the one hand, he says, most of my fellow countrymen have no idea that coal mines might one day be exhausted. But I have observed the trend of the coal trade, and I can tell you that we're already across the moment of peak coal. We are already on the downward slope of coal consumption, and within a generation or two, we're going to run out of coal. And what happens then? And here you have the quote here on the left, which I really love. He says, "The prosperity and glory of this flourishing and fortunate island are at an end. Our cities and great towns must then become ruinous heaps for want of fuel. Our mines and manufactures must fail from the same cause, and consequently our commerce must vanish. In short, the commerce, wealth, importance, glory, and happiness of Great Britain will dwindle to nothing in proportion as our coal and other mines fail. And the future inhabitants of this island must live, like its first inhabitants, by fishing and hunting." So again, you see, on the one hand, how he very presciently recognizes the centrality of the fossil fuel energy economy to growth. And on the other hand, he's dreading the moment when we run out of coal, because then the economy will collapse. And we'll have to, Williams and others will come back to this idea that Britain once again must become a wooded isle, because wood fuel will have to drive the economy. All right, now I have three more figures to talk about, and this will be a little more quick. They're all 19th century figures. Thomas Carlyle, I'm sure, will be familiar to many of you. He's often said to be the most important intellectual of the early Victorian period. He was an essayist and translator and historian, among many other things. And practically everyone who wrote anything of significance in Victorian Britain was influenced by him. He was such an important critic. And here I want to draw your attention to the fact that Carlyle coined the word environment in English. And I've taken a quotation here from an essay on Robbie Burns, where he uses his coinage, his word environment. And this will allow us to understand what he meant by it. He says, "All that environs man in the material and moral universe is lovely in his sight. The hoary hawthorn, the troop of grey plover, the solitary curlew, all are dear to him. All live in this earth along with him, and to all he is knit as in a mysterious brotherhood. So you see how different this idea is from Smith and Sinclair and Williams. Here, the central idea is of man, all humans, embedded in the natural world, in a great vast chain of kinship with all things living. Now, Carlyle was nothing but consistent about this. He celebrated, he hated modern industry and celebrated medieval arts and crafts. In fact, he inspired the arts and crafts movement in Britain. His idea of the environment is impossible to detach from his sense of spiritual kinship with the land itself. So you could say it's a deepening of Smith's idea of nature, but it to the point of really being mingled up with spirituality. For Smith, nature is a kind teacher that gives humans prosperity. For Carlyle, nature is the source of love and of meaning in the universe. But I want to add here a quick caveat. Carlyle, in later years, has gained a different kind of reputation, and I don't want to skip over that. It's important to recognize that Carlyle, unfortunately, was a virulent anti-Semite and racist, and that his historical works tended towards a kind of crude hero worship. So we must take the good with the bad with Carlyle. I think he on the one hand he introduces a very important romantic idea of the earth as the mother of human life, but on the other hand he also has these unfortunate other ideas that I wish we could leave behind. Okay. Moving on to our penultimate thinker in my sequence here, Robert Chambers. Probably most of you are not familiar with. He and his brother William Chambers were very important publishers in Edinburgh. And Chambers published anonymously in 1844 a book called Vestiges of Natural Creation, which is the great bestseller of the early Victorian era, and quickly infamous. Because in it, Chambers, the anonymous author, argued for a materialist and evolutionary account of the beginning of the universe and the origins of life and the evolution of mankind on Earth. So he represents, if you like, a geological idea of nature, that nature is ancient, hundreds of thousands, millions of years old, and that the forces that have created the natural world must be understood through geology, through natural history. And the reason why I want to bring up Chambers here is that in his book, he mentions, he's one of the first thinkers to mention the side effect of the new fossil fuel economy. And basically the story goes like this. He says that in the depths of time, before mankind appeared on the stage, Earth was covered with a great forest of giant ferns. The atmosphere was poisonous because it contained too much carbon dioxide. But these fern forests gradually sucked the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere into the trees. And then as the trees fell and became buried in the ground and sediments were layered upon sediments, under pressure and under a high temperature, these fern trees with all the carbon inside them became coal. Okay, so now you see what I'm getting at. And this is why this idea of the fern forest was known as the Carboniferous forest. Chambers not only tells this story of the Carboniferous forest, but he draws attention to a fascinating consequence or corollary of this way of thinking about nature. He says there can be little doubt that a large infusion of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere at the present day would be attended by precisely the same circumstances as in the time of the Carboniferous formation, the Carboniferous forest. In such a world, land, animal life would become extinct and vegetation would be enormous. The coal strata would begin to form in vast accumulations. So basically he's saying, all right, so if all the coal came from the Carboniferous forest, when we start burning the coal, we're returning the carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere, and Earth will eventually revert to the poisonous existence of the Carboniferous when no animals could exist, because the atmosphere was so loaded with, at the time, Victorians believed that excess carbon dioxide was actually a lethal gas. So here we have, in other words, here we have in Chambers in 1844, one of the first representations of anthropogenic climate change from fossil fuel, poisoning the earth. Now, he doesn't go the extra step then to ask, well, maybe we should stop using coal and revert to water power or other reasons. He doesn't see this as an imminent threat. But the very idea that he can articulate this notion of anthropogenic climate change in 1844, I think is fascinating. If you like, he is one of the earliest thinkers to imagine the carbon cycle, the cycling of carbon from the atmosphere to the earth, to the geosphere, and then back into the economy, and then back to the atmosphere. So basically the cycling of carbon as a source of life and as also as a variable controlling the climate. Okay, that brings me to the final figure in my series, and I said I consider John Ruskin a Scotsman, even though he spent most of his time in England. But John Ruskin studied with William Buckland, and he read Robert Chambers and imbibed from the early Victorians exactly this idea of the carbon cycle that I just mentioned. And here in this picture from 1882, his secretary, Robin Collingwood, has drawn what Ruskin called the Great Smoke Cloud over the Swiss Alps. In the 1880s, John Ruskin became convinced that pollution from factories and other sources were poisoning the atmosphere. And he became convinced that the climate of Europe was changing with this pollution. And he decided that it was his responsibility to create a new economic order. And he formed an association called the Guild of St. George, and moved to the Lake District, not Scotland. I wish it was the Scottish Highlands. That would fit my story better. But he moves to the English Lakes and surrounds himself with like-minded people, like the Collingwood family. The book I wrote with my wife, Vicky, Green Victorians, is the story of this utopian movement. And the Guild of St. George and the group surrounding Ruskin solemnly swear not to use steam engines unless absolutely necessary, and to bring back a pre-industrial economy. So you see the line here from Carlyle's medievalism reaches fruition with Ruskin. How could Ruskin be, why did Ruskin come to these ideas? Well, I think Ruskin represents, in part, the legacy of Presbyterianism, of the legacy of Church of Scotland, which he knew from early childhood, from his parents, with the new science of natural history, of geophysics, of geology. So Ruskin here represents a kind of synthesis of many of the threads that we have been talking about. I'll only add to this that Ruskin succumbed to mental illness around this time, and eventually in the 1890s, in the last few years of his life, fell into catatonic silence. His followers continued with his mission. And so there was a flourishing arts and crafts society in the Lake District all the way up to the beginning of the Great War in 1914. And again, that story I tell in Green Victorians, if you're interested. Now, let me try to conclude here with two major thoughts. The first one is that many of the ideas we've talked about here in this presentation now seem more relevant than ever. That if we look at the trends, both in the economy and in the environment, we seem to be headed towards a crisis of the Earth system. For the first time, the human economy is growing so quickly that it is overwhelming the Earth system in terms of pollution and other environmental disturbances. We're running out of the planet, is one way to think about it. So where for Adam Smith, there were huge spaces still to be colonized and settled, like America, there is no other America anymore, right? We are living in a world where old ideas of infinite growth are coming into question. Now, I don't mean to be a pessimist about this. I think there are many possible paths out of this situation we're in. We can discuss that in the Q&A. But I just want to bring home again the prescience of so many of these Scottish intellectuals in grappling with the problem of growth and the limits to growth, long before it became an acute acute pressure in politics. And that brings me to the final conclusion here, which is a more historical question. Why is it that Scottish thinkers look to the environment so often in thinking about human destiny? And here I have 4 speculative answers. The first one is what will be obvious to all of you: the geography of Scotland, a very small country with a very fractured and composite nature, with highlands and lowlands, industrial zones and rural zones in very close proximity. Anyone who knows Scotland will know that, and surely these intellectuals did as well. The second point is that the history of Scotland is the story, as I said with Smith, of self-consciously catching up with England. But it's also a story of worrying about the Highlands as a cul-de-sac, as a place where growth was difficult. So we have at the same time a sense of hope and optimism, what I call cornucopianism. Cornucopia here meaning infinite growth, but shot through with anxieties about limits. And that I call finitarianism. So worldviews where limits are dominant, as we saw with Sinclair and some of the other thinkers. The third important element here in the explanation has got to be religion. The long shadow of the Church of Scotland, its cosmology, and also its awareness of the end of the world, of the end of times, of the apocalypse. Again, you see that clearly in Ruskin, and maybe also in Williams' idea of the collapse of human civilization. Fourth, and also obvious from my discussion, is the central role of the sciences. And here we have to remind ourselves that Scottish thinkers played an essential role in the formation of modern economics, of geology, and physics. So all these things, I think, help explain why Scottish thinkers took such interest in the environment and the relation between the environment and the human. That's the end of the story. Thanks so much. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, Professor. That was absolutely fascinating. And I'd like everyone to feel free to turn your cameras back on and unmute your mics, and let's have some discussion with Professor Jonsson. I think while everybody's getting organized, Fredrik, I'll just start with a segue there from what you had said earlier. You mentioned that there are many possible paths out of the current environmental crisis, and I'm hoping you will please elaborate.
Well, this is the theme of my newest book that I co-authored with my good friend Carl Vennerlind. The name of it again is Scarcity. It's the story of how European thinkers have grappled with the idea of growth and limits in really over the last 500 years. And we suggest that you could think about this under 11 different rubrics. So the book charts 11 different ways of thinking about the relation between limits and growth. And then we group these 11 ideas into two major umbrella categories. And again, I just mentioned it before, cornucopianism and finitarianism. So cornucopians believe that humans have the power to transform nature, and that this power also makes it possible for us to develop new desires, to develop new kinds of wants, new consumer demand of many kinds. So this, of course, this is very close to Adam Smith and David Hume and modern economics. So it's an expansive, optimistic view of the world and of humanity. And it's arguably the dominant idea we have right now of nature and the human. We think of ourselves as lords of the creation. But all throughout, since the 1500s to the present, there's also been a different way of imagining nature, which we call finitarianism. And that is the idea that nature is inherently finite, it's fragile, it is not always benign. It can be very destructive. It can wipe out whole cities with volcanic explosions and new pathogens, plagues, and so forth. The church, the medieval church and the early modern church represents one version of this finitarian argument, right? Where nature is a punishing force. It's a limiting force, and humans are proud and sinful and wicked, and they need discipline and limits to live on earth, right? This idea, of course, has grown weaker with modern economic change, with the decline of the church, but it's still around. And so one way to think about environmentalism is to imagine environmentalism as a kind of finitarian position, a revival of the finitarian. Of course, not necessarily religious, but still sharing some affinities. So we think of, I'm not going to give you a concrete answer to this, Connie, but I'll just say finitarianism and cornucopianism have been in a duel for the last 500 years. And I think that duel is going to continue. I don't think it's been resolved. I don't think one side has decisively won over the other. And you could say all these environmental changes that are happening now are giving new fuel to the finitarians, if you like. It's giving them, it's starting to look like they were right all along, or at least their argument was more powerful than we have realized. So we don't take a strong position on this in the book. We're just presenting the facts. But it does seem to us that the kind of standard idea of nature in modern economics is probably outdated and needs updating with modern science. Whatever that means is not clear. I mean, you could be a protectionist with Trump. You could say tariffs are the right way to go. You might have a flourishing of free trade, a different version of Smith's idea of free trade, maybe with a more focus on sustainability. we're not we're not prophets. So we're not gonna. All we're doing in the book is to basically try to explain the long history of these ideas. And as you see, Scotland has had a very important role in the duel between cornucopians and finitarians.
Thank you. Very, very good. There is a question in the chat. Bonnie was asking, where can your books be purchased? Is that Amazon.com, or do we need to go to the university?
You can find them on Amazon, or if you prefer an independent bookseller, I know there are some very good bookstores in Chicago if you happen to be around in the city. I think my first book about the Highlands is actually now out of print. But if you can try and order it, and if you can't get hold of it, email me, and I have a few spare copies. Actually, they're sitting right next to me here in my office, so I'll be glad to send you one. Okay.
Fabulous. Other questions, comments?
I see another chat here from Dawn. Are there modern economists that you follow because of their views on the environment? Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's an economist in Oxford in England named Rayworth. Karen Rayworth, Raworth. And she has a book called Donut Economics, which I think is really interesting. It's basically, it's an optimistic reinterpretation of economics. So it's not apocalyptic like Ruskin's ideas. It doesn't ask us to go back to the Middle Ages, but it asks how we could reformulate basic ideas of economics in light of ecology and the environmental sciences.
Very interesting.
Yeah. And the reason she uses the idea of the donut is that she wants to point out that basically the economy exists within the larger sphere of the environment, of the global environment, or what we call the Earth system. That doesn't mean that we're trapped, that we can't grow the economy, but it means that we always have to think about the trade-offs between the systems in the environment that sustain us, that give us, for example, oxygen, right? 50% of oxygen production comes from the ocean, from plankton. So Rayworth and I would both agree that we are going to get into big trouble if we pollute the ocean and destroy the food chains in the ocean, so that plankton production dwindles or even collapses. So plankton and oxygen give you a really dramatic example of how the economy depends on the natural world. And again, it's rather like Adam Smith in that sense. He too saw the economy as bounded by and embedded inside the natural world. He had no idea about oxygen or plankton, but you can see how in some ways we're following in Smith's footsteps by thinking about the economy as embedded in a broader framework of
Did
environmental.
this come up very much? Adam Smith's 300th anniversary was like 2 years ago. Did this come up, this argument with nature, or this focus? It's just so fascinating. I learned so much on this conversation today. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Dawn. That's very kind of you. There was a big celebration of Smith's life at the University of Glasgow. Some of my friends were there. They did not see fit to invite me, I'm afraid. So I wasn't able to bring this argument to the table. But I'm sure ecology and questions of climate came up in the conference. Yeah. And it seems to me absolutely impossible to deny that Smith, in looking around, really believed that agriculture and the natural world form the foundation of the economy. And all you have to do is open up the Wealth of Nations, and you'll see he goes on for pages about cows and cow fodder and such. Usually we just skip over those parts because, you know, they seem a bit archaic and irrelevant. But they bring to bear just how much of an agrarian Smith was. Yeah.
26 was also in Scotland. Did you feel any of this Scottish viewpoint sort of as a hosting nation made its way into any of the discussions?
Sorry, I missed the very first part of that, Dawn.
COP26 was in Scotland, the big environmental meeting of the world. And that was, you know, quite a celebration. Everyone was very excited about it if you're Scottish. So did you feel that Scotland made a little mark on either a takeaway or something important?
Yeah, I'm gonna guess that there are other people here on the Zoom call who know more about Scottish politics in the present and questions of sustainability than I do. I'll just say in general that I think Scottish identity and Scottish politics remain somewhat torn between cornucopian and finitarian views. And you see this very clearly with North Sea oil, right? It's long been the contestation of the independence movement that the English stole the North Sea wealth, right? And here you see fossil fuel identified as a source of wealth and independence, right? That's an old idea, of course, and very potent. On the other hand, you also have other elements in the independence movement and in Scottish politics in general who see Scotland's path should be a Scandinavian one, right? Following Sweden and Denmark in becoming an economy that's based on some combination of renewables, of biomass and possibly nuclear, right? Yeah, I mean, speaking as a Swede, I think that's actually a pretty good solution. And notice it's not anti-growth. It is very much pro-growth, but it respects the boundaries of nature in ways that the fossil fuel economy does not. Yeah.
Thank you.
You know, another insight that Adam Smith had goes back to your point about the, you know, scarcity and the role of government. Because arguably you could say that not just thinking about, you know, kind of the capitalist view of government interfering in the free market, but rather government is the whole structure in which how power is allocated through the economy, through government, through our social structure. And, you know, Smith's point is, you know, there can be harmony if we adjust those structures and, you know, so essentially live with nature in a more equitable way, which I guess would be your Swedish model or your Scandinavian approach to it. And certainly this is very much contested in Scottish politics right now. I mean, the whole, you know, the Labour Party is very much promoting kind of the cornucopian view of, you know, of expanding the North Sea oil and the benefits it would bring to the society, whereas there are certainly elements in the SNP who are much more on that Scandinavian model, as you point out. So all this is very relevant to what's going on right now in Scotland.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, we're seeing a very interesting example of government interference in the economy right now here at home in the United States as well. We won't go into the details of that, but
well, but on that point, you could say, you know, Elon Musk and the tech bros are definitely cornucopian because they're going to solve all our problems by going to Mars.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good point.
We hadn't gone that far.
Yeah.
You know, I can't help but draw a correlation between the environment and evolution and genealogy. And, you know, many of us are involved with researching our genealogy, but I can't help but mention, Fredrik, you know, myself, my ancestors being mostly from the northern shores of Scotland. I have roughly 33% of my gene pool is Scandinavian.
Mm.
And, we think fondly of the Viking influence and so forth, but I can't help but wonder about the Swedes. They must have a lot of Scottish blood as well. And so my guess is you have a little, and we're liable to begin claiming you.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think if you go all the way back to the Vikings, I think it would have been Norwegian and Danish Vikings mostly that went to Scotland and Ireland and England. The Swedes tended to look east instead. So, there's long been the idea that Rus, the first Russian kingdom, was actually founded by Swedish Vikings, which is I'm not sure that's right, but it would be pretty ironic if it was true. Since Russia afterwards has been the arch enemy of Sweden for hundreds and hundreds of years. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. No, I did, Connie, I did one of those ancestry genealogy kits as well. And sadly, I didn't find any, there was maybe a little bit of British in me. Yeah. And also some Spanish for some reason, but I'm 90% Scandinavian, if you are to believe those things. Yeah. Yeah.
Very good.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts, questions on any of the things I talked about?
I was corrected by John Manchester, who informed me that there are many ball teams at the University of Chicago, so forgive me.
Yeah, we're under a more progressive administration now. We brought back our American football team and lots of other sports. I'm not sure they're very good, I'll be honest, but at least we have a team now.
Excellent presentation.
Excellent.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much.
Yeah,
Appreciate
very,
this.
really good, really good.
Well, you've been very kind, and thanks for all your questions. And I hope to join you at some of the events that Gus mentioned. I take it they're going to happen near Chicago in June.
Yes, the Highland Games happens at the DuPage County Fairgrounds in Wheaton. So that's probably 50 minutes west of the city. But yeah, we had 10,000 people last year. I'm sorry, the heavy athletics, the Dogs of Scotland, all of these things. Connie has a history forum tent that she's had for a long time that she manages. And we will have a cultural tent this year. We will have a speaker from the National Trust come in, and then of course John McEwen will do his one-man show as well. So we have a couple things coming up.
Excellent, very exciting. Look
And
forward to
that's
that.
Father's Day weekend, by the way, but it's Friday and Saturday, not Sunday, and it's a great
Right.
event to bring the whole family to.
Right.
And we'll look forward to meeting Vicky.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I should say Vicky and I live in an old house here in the Indiana Dunes. So we're actually on the south side of the city, out in we live on the doorstep of the national park here, the Indiana Dunes National Park.
Nice, beautiful.
Yeah.
It's really
And-
lovely,
and it-
especially today.
And the Indiana Dunes are very important in the development of environmentalism in this area. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And in fact, it was women from my little community here, Ogden Dunes, who led the way
Oh, yes.
in protecting the dunes from the big companies that were building steel mills. But you know what? The Indiana Dunes are a great example of cornucopian and finitarian tendencies coexisting.
yes.
I think the steel mills are doing a lot of good for us. I don't want them to go away. But we also have some of the most biodiverse and lovely landscapes you can find in all of North America. We have, during top bird migration, 1 million birds come across the dunes every night. Can you imagine that? If you
night.
could see that? Yeah, every night.
Amazing.
Nice.
I wrote my first essay in my environmental class at UC on the dunes. So,
Okay.
it was and I grew up going there every summer. So it's a wonderful place.
Yeah, we're so glad we discovered this wonderful place, and it's a wonderful warm community, by the way, too. So I really recommend it here. Listen, I'm gonna put my email in the chat, and if anyone feels like reaching out about getting the books or just chatting, I'm very happy to hear from you. So if you go into the chat, you'll find my UChicago email. So please be in
Thank
touch if you like.
Connie, did we record this session?
Yes, it'll be on the Chicago Scots YouTube channel. And
Okay.
if I never have that handy, it's my bad, but all you have to do is Google YouTube and Chicago Scots, and it'll be front and center on your screen.
Yeah, I know many
That'll
people
take
who
a
would
few
appreciate
days,
this.
but we will post. And
Yeah.
yes,
Really
Fredrik,
nice.
Can I say, this is Gus here. I'm driving, so I had to have my camera switched off. But can I say thank you for a terrific presentation? It was really thought-provoking and inspiring, and I will enjoy reading your book if I could get my hands on it. We have a library at the Caledonia Senior Living of Scottish Literature, and I'd surely love to include your books in there.
You know, I'd be glad, Gus, to donate my books to your library. Absolutely. I'm very touched that you center on dementia care, because I lost my mother to dementia, so it's close to heart. And just be in touch, Gus, and maybe through my email, and I can arrange that for you.
Will do.
Yeah.
Will do. I'd love to give you a tour. Come and see the place. It's a unique setting, and we're very, very proud of it.
and
Wonderful.
our condolences.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yes, indeed.
Good.
Okay, well, I think on that uplifting note, we have lots of things to look forward to and getting to know Fredrik better. But thank you so much for this enlightening presentation today. It was just very value added. And I also want to thank everyone that joined in today. I know there are a lot of conflicting activities today, this morning, and especially in Chicago, but we appreciate your support and you joining every month. And until we get together again next month, please stay safe and be well. Thank
Thanks
you.
again, everyone.
Thank you, Connie.
Be in touch,
Thank you.
yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Chat.
Connie, I just want to say thank you again one last time. Really appreciate the invitation. This was marvelous, and I'm very impressed how many came on a beautiful Saturday morning to listen to me. I hope everyone goes out and enjoys the nice weather after this.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right.
We'll be in touch.
Great. Okay. Bye now.
Don, see you next month. Donald, our speaker.
Okay. See you next month.
Bye, everyone.